I still think about that summer. Not every day, not anymore, but often enough. It comes back in small moments when the power flickers during a storm, when I hear static on an old radio, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the house is too quiet. I tell myself it was nothing. I've been telling myself that for years now. But some part of me knows better. Some part of me never really left that tower. I took the job in early June. Fire lookout, seasonal position, United States Forest Service. The posting was for a place called Shepherd Ridge, deep in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, about 40 miles from the nearest town and even farther from anything resembling civilization. The tower sat at 6,000 feet, surrounded by old-growth forest Douglas fir, western red cedar, hemlock trees so tall and so dense that from certain angles you couldn't see the sky at all. I remember reading the listing online and feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't excitement, exactly. It was more like recognition, like I had been waiting for it without knowing. I had been working as a contractor for a land management company in Seattle for almost 5 years. Desk work mostly, reports, permits, environmental assessments. The pay was fine. The people were fine. Everything was fine, and that was the problem. I had grown up in rural Montana, spent my childhood in forests not so different from the ones I would later watch over. Somewhere along the way, I had drifted into a life that didn't feel like mine. The noise of the city had become unbearable, not loud, just constant, a hum that never stopped. I needed silence. Real silence. The kind you can only find when there's no one else around for miles. The interview process was straightforward. A phone call with a district ranger named Ellen Marsh, a background check, a few forms to sign. She asked me if I understood what I was signing up for. Isolation, she said. Real isolation. No internet, no cell service, limited radio contact, resupply every 2 weeks, weather permitting. I told her I understood. She asked if I had any experience in remote postings. I mentioned 2 summers I had spent working on a fishing vessel in Alaska. Weeks at sea with a small crew and nothing but water in every direction. She seemed satisfied with that. A week later, I received a confirmation email. The job was mine. I arrived at the ranger station on June 9th. It was a small building at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by forest on 3 sides. Ellen Marsh met me in the parking lot. She was older than I had expected, maybe late 50s, with short grey hair and the kind of face that suggested she had seen more than she cared to talk about. She shook my hand firmly and handed me a folder, maps, emergency protocols, radio frequencies, a list of supplies that would be waiting for me at the tower. We went over everything twice. She showed me how to use the Osborne Fire Finder, the device I would use to pinpoint smoke on the horizon. She explained the reporting procedures, the weather patterns, the wildlife I might encounter. Bears, mostly. Cougars, occasionally. Nothing I couldn't handle if I kept my distance and used common sense. Before I left, she said something that stayed with me. She was standing by my truck, one hand on the door, looking out at the trees. She said, "The forest is old up there, older than most people realize. It has a way of making you feel small. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it takes some getting used to." I nodded, unsure of what to say. She patted the door twice and stepped back. "Check in every morning and every evening If I don't hear from you, I send someone up. Don't make me send someone up." I promised I wouldn't. Then I started the engine and drove. The road to Shepherd Ridge was 19 miles of dirt and gravel, winding through forest so thick that the sunlight barely reached the ground. I passed no other vehicles. I saw no other people. The only signs of life were the birds, jays mostly, and the occasional hawk circling high above the tree line. The last 5 miles were steep, the road narrowing to a single lane carved into the side of the mountain. I had to stop twice to move fallen branches. By the time I reached the clearing where the tower stood, the sun was already beginning to set. The tower itself was smaller than I had imagined. A wooden cabin perched on a steel frame, maybe 14 feet by 14 feet, 60 feet off the ground. A narrow staircase wrapped around the structure, leading up to a catwalk that circled the cabin. Below, there was a small storage shed, an outhouse, and a rain barrel connected to a filtration system. That was it, my home for the next 4 months. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the metal creak beneath my weight. The cabin was simple but functional. A single bed in one corner, a wood-burning stove in another, a desk by the window with a fire finder mounted on top. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned food, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, and a small library of paperback books left behind by previous lookouts. The window stretched from floor to ceiling on all 4 sides, offering an unobstructed view of the forest in every direction. I stood there for a long time, watching the light fade from gold to orange to deep red. The trees seemed to go on forever. I couldn't see a single road, a single building, a single light. Just forest. Endless, unbroken forest. That first night, I slept better than I had in years. The days fell into a rhythm quickly. I woke at dawn, made coffee on the propane stove, and spent the first hour of daylight scanning the horizon for smoke. The firefinder was a simple device, a rotating sighting mechanism mounted on a topographic map, but it required patience and attention to detail. I checked in with the ranger station at 7 each morning, reporting weather conditions and visibility. Most days, the radio exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Clear skies, no smoke, nothing to report. Ellen's voice was calm and professional, never lingering longer than necessary. After the morning check-in, the day was mine. I read. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, never straying more than a few hundred yards from the tower. I watched the birds, learned to recognize their calls, began to understand the subtle shifts in their behavior that signaled changes in weather. I cooked simple meals, rice, beans, canned vegetables, and ate them on the catwalk, watching the sun move across the sky. In the evenings, I checked in again, reported the same nothing I had reported that morning, and settled into the quiet hours before sleep. The silence was immense. Not empty, but full of wind, full of rustling leaves, full of sounds I was only beginning to recognize. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the blood moving through your veins. For the first 2 weeks, everything was exactly as I had hoped, peaceful, predictable, alone. It was sometime during the 3rd week that I first noticed something strange. It was small, so small that I almost didn't register it at the time. I had been sitting on the catwalk, watching the sunset, when I heard a sound from somewhere below. A branch snapping. Sharp and distinct, the way a branch sounds when something heavy steps on it. I leaned over the railing and looked down. The clearing was empty. The trees at the edge were still. I waited, listening, but the sound didn't repeat. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it had been a deer. They were common in the area, Ellen had told me. They moved through the forest at dusk, grazing on the undergrowth. I went back to watching the sunset. I didn't think about it again. But 2 nights later, it happened again. The same sound, a single branch snapping somewhere in the trees just beyond the clearing. I was inside the cabin this time, reading by the light of a kerosene lamp. I set the book down and listened. Silence. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, another snap. Closer this time. I stood and walked to the window that faced the tree line. The moon was nearly full, casting pale light across the clearing. I could see the edge of the forest clearly. Nothing moved. The trees stood perfectly still. I watched for almost an hour, but I saw nothing. Eventually, I returned to my book. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, a bear, maybe a coyote. The forest was full of life. Sounds were inevitable. The following morning, I mentioned it during my check-in. Casually, almost as an afterthought, I asked Ellen if there had been any reports of bears in the area. She said there hadn't, not recently. I told her I had heard something moving near the tower at night. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if I had seen anything. I said no. She told me to keep the storage shed locked and to make sure I wasn't leaving any food scraps outside. Standard protocol. I thanked her and signed off. I didn't mention it again. But the sounds continued. Not every night, but often. Always at dusk or after dark. Always from the trees. Sometimes it was just a single snap, sometimes a series of them, like something moving slowly through the undergrowth. I started paying closer attention. I noticed patterns. The sounds always seemed to come from the same direction, the northwest corner of the clearing, where the trees grew thickest and the ground sloped down toward a ravine. I never saw anything. I never heard footsteps, never heard breathing, never heard any of the sounds an animal would normally make, just the branches, snapping, one by one, as if something was standing just beyond the tree line, shifting its weight in the darkness. I began to have trouble sleeping, not because I was afraid, exactly. I didn't know what I was feeling. It was more like awareness, a heightened sense that I was not as alone as I had believed. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence and waiting for it to be broken. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. The uncertainty was worse than the sounds themselves. Around the end of the 3rd week, the radio started acting strange. It had always been unreliable, static, dropped signals, interference from weather, but now it seemed worse. Some mornings, I couldn't reach the ranger station at all. I would try for 10, 15 minutes, cycling through frequencies, adjusting the antenna, and hear nothing but white noise. Other times, I would hear fragments of voices, distant and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Ellen told me it was probably atmospheric interference. Summer storms in the mountains could disrupt radio signals for days. She said she would send someone to check the equipment during the next resupply. I told her not to worry about it. I could manage. But the truth was, the silence between transmissions had started to feel different, heavier. When the radio worked, I found myself talking longer than necessary. asking questions I didn't need answers to, just to hear another human voice. When it didn't work, I sat in the cabin and listened to the static, trying to convince myself that the patterns I heard were meaningless, random noise, nothing more. It was during the 4th week that I found the first sign. I had gone for a walk along the fire road that led down from the ridge. I didn't usually go far, half a mile, maybe less, but that day I felt restless. The weather had been grey for almost a week, low clouds hanging over the mountains, and I hadn't seen the sun in days. I needed to move, to feel my legs working, to remind myself that the world extended beyond the clearing. I walked slowly, watching the trees, listening to the silence. The forest felt different that day, quieter than usual. No birds, no wind, no sound at all, except my own footsteps on the gravel. I almost missed it. A small pile of stones, stacked neatly beside the road. 3 stones, each about the size of my fist, placed one on top of the other. A cairn, the kind hikers sometimes build to mark a trail, but there were no trails here. No hikers, no visitors, no one but me for miles in any direction. I crouched down and examined it. The stones were clean, no moss or dirt. They hadn't been there long. I looked around, scanning the trees, the road, the undergrowth. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbance, no sign that anyone had been there. I stood for a long time, staring at those 3 stones, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I knocked them down with my foot and walked back to the tower. I didn't mention it during my check-in that evening. I'm not sure why. Part of me felt foolish. It was just a pile of rocks. After all, anyone could have built it. A hiker who had wandered off the main trails. A ranger on patrol. Someone passing through. There were explanations, rational explanations. But another part of me didn't want to say the words out loud. Didn't want to hear myself describe what I had found and what it might mean. That night, the sounds were louder, closer. I lay in bed, listening, counting the seconds between each snap. They were coming faster now, more deliberate. I could almost imagine a shape moving through the darkness, circling the clearing, testing the edges. I didn't sleep until the first light of dawn began to show through the windows. The next morning, I found another cairn. This one was at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet from the base of the tower. 4 stones this time, stacked higher than the first. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at it, feeling something cold settle into my chest. It hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of it. I had scanned the clearing at sunset, the way I always did, and there had been nothing, just grass and dirt and the shadow of the trees. But now, in the pale morning light, those 4 stones sat there like a message I couldn't read. I climbed down and approached it slowly. The stones were the same as before, smooth, clean, carefully placed. I circled it, looking for footprints, for any sign of who had been there. The ground was soft from the recent rain. If someone had walked across the clearing, there should have been tracks. But there was nothing, just the stones, sitting there, waiting. I knocked them down. I kicked them into the grass and watched them scatter. Then I went back up to the tower and sat by the radio, waiting for my check-in time. When Ellen's voice came through, I told her I thought someone might be in the area. She asked what I meant. I told her about the cairns, about the sounds at night, about the feeling I couldn't shake that I was being watched. There was a long pause. Then she said she would make a note of it. She said it was probably nothing. Hikers got lost sometimes, wandered into restricted areas, built cairns to mark their path. She said I should keep my eyes open, but not to worry. She said she would check in again tomorrow. I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. But that night, when the sounds started again, I couldn't convince myself anymore. Something was out there. Something that knew I was here. Something that wanted me to know it was watching. The days that followed blurred together. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. I stopped reading, stopped walking, stopped doing anything except watching the trees and waiting for the next sign. The cairns appeared every few days now, sometimes at the edge of the clearing, sometimes farther down the road, once at the very base of the tower stairs. Each one was slightly different. Different number of stones, different arrangement, different location, but they all had the same quality, the same careful, deliberate construction. They weren't random, they meant something. I just didn't know what. The radio grew worse. Some days I couldn't make contact at all. Other days I would hear voices faint, distant, speaking in patterns that almost sounded like words but never quite resolved into meaning. I started keeping it on all the time, letting the static fill the cabin because the silence had become unbearable. I needed sound, any sound. Even meaningless noise was better than the quiet that pressed in from all sides. I began to see things, or thought I did. Shadows at the edge of the tree line that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. A shape in the darkness that might have been a person, or might have been a tree, or might have been nothing at all. I would stare at a spot in the forest for minutes at a time, trying to determine if what I was seeing was real. Most of the time, I couldn't tell. The line between perception and imagination had started to blur. I thought about leaving. More than once, I walked down to my truck and sat behind the wheel, keys in hand, ready to drive away and never look back. But something stopped me every time. I told myself it was pride. I had taken this job, I had wanted this solitude, and I wasn't going to let fear drive me away. But the truth was more complicated than that. Part of me wanted to know, wanted to understand what was happening, who was out there, why they had chosen me. Leaving felt like surrender. Leaving felt like admitting that the forest had beaten me. So I stayed and watched and waited. It was near the end of the 6th week when I found the cabin. I had walked farther than usual that day, following a faint trail I had noticed on one of the topographic maps. The trail wasn't marked on any of the official Forest Service documents, just a thin line on an old survey map I had found in the storage shed. It led northwest, toward the ravine, into the thickest part of the forest. I told myself I was just exploring, clearing my head, getting out of the tower for a few hours. But I knew, even then, that I was looking for something. Looking for an explanation. Looking for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The trail was overgrown, barely visible beneath the undergrowth. I walked slowly, pushing through ferns and brambles, ducking under low branches. The trees grew closer together here, their canopies blocking out most of the light. The air was damp and cold, smelling of moss and decay. I had been walking for maybe an hour when I saw it. A structure, small, low to the ground, half hidden by the vegetation. At first I thought it was a fallen tree, a tangle of branches and debris. But as I got closer, I saw the shape of it: walls, a roof, a doorway, dark and empty like an open mouth. A cabin, old, abandoned, collapsing in on itself. It looked like it had been there for decades, maybe longer. The wood was grey and rotting, the windows long since shattered, the roof sagging under the weight of accumulated pine needles and moss. I stood at the edge of the clearing, if you could call it that, just a small gap in the trees where the cabin had been built, and stared. I had studied the maps of this area carefully. I knew every trail, every road, every structure within 10 miles of my tower. This cabin wasn't on any of them. It didn't exist. And yet here it was, solid and real, waiting in the darkness of the forest like it had been waiting for a very long time. I should have turned back. I knew that, even as I stepped forward. Every instinct told me to leave, to return to the tower, to pretend I had never found this place. But I couldn't. The need to know was stronger than the fear. I crossed the clearing and stopped at the doorway. The interior was dark, too dark to see clearly. I pulled out my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a single room. Dirt floor, bare walls, no furniture except for a wooden chair in the center. The chair was facing the doorway, facing me. On the seat, arranged in a neat row, were 5 stones, smooth, clean, carefully placed. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the walk back to the tower, the climb up the stairs, the hours I spent sitting by the window, watching the trees turn from green to black as the sun went down. I remember the fear, cold and absolute, settling into my bones like frost. Someone had been in that cabin. Recently. Someone who knew I would come looking. Someone who had left those stones as a message, a greeting, a warning. I didn't know which. I didn't want to know. That night, I tried to reach Ellen on the radio. Static. I tried every frequency, every channel, every combination I could think of. Nothing but noise. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. And somewhere out there, in the darkness of the forest, something was waiting. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, flashlight in hand, watching the clearing. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the darkness was almost total. I could see nothing beyond the faint outline of the trees, but I could hear the sounds were different that night. Not branches snapping, but something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the tower. I tracked them with my ears, following their movement around the clearing. They never came closer, never retreated, just circled, around and around. For hours. When dawn finally came, I went down to check the clearing. The grass was undisturbed. The ground showed no tracks, but at the base of the stairs, where there had been nothing the night before, there was a single stone placed precisely in the center of the bottom step. I picked it up. It was warm. I left that morning. I packed what I could carry, climbed into my truck, and drove down the mountain without looking back. I didn't stop at the ranger station. I didn't file a report. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had found in that rotting cabin in the woods. I just drove, away from the forest, away from the silence, away from whatever had been watching me from the darkness. Ellen called me 3 days later. She said she had been trying to reach me, that the radio had been down for over a week, that she had sent a ranger to check on me and found the tower empty. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. I told her the isolation had gotten to me, that I had decided to leave early, that I was sorry for not following protocol. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she understood. She said it happens sometimes. She said the forest could do strange things to a person's mind. I didn't argue with her. I didn't tell her about the cairns, the footsteps, the cabin, the stones. I didn't tell her that I had stopped sleeping, that I still heard those footsteps in my dreams, that I woke up every night at 3 in the morning and lay in the darkness, listening for sounds that weren't there. I just thanked her for calling and hung up. That was 5 years ago. I live in the city now, a small apartment in Portland, surrounded by noise and light and people. I tell myself I'm safe here. I tell myself that whatever was in those woods can't reach me, can't find me, can't follow me into this world of concrete and glass. Most days, I almost believe it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear something outside my window. A sound that doesn't quite fit. A branch snapping where there are no trees. Footsteps on the pavement that stop just outside my door. I lie in bed and listen, heart pounding, waiting for the sound to repeat. It never does. But in those moments, in that breathless silence between one heartbeat and the next, I know the truth. I never really left that forest, and I don't think I ever will.